Welcome to Rodney Veal's Inspired By. I'm Ann Rodolanti, the series producer of The Art Show, which airs on Think TV in Dayton and CET in Cincinnati. I'm so glad you've taken time out of your day to join us for the very first episode of our podcast with our Art Show host, Rodney Veal. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hello, Countess. This is a great honor to have you on the first episode of the Art Show podcast. So thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to be with us.
Thank you. Yes, I am very excited. I'm so glad I get to be an inaugural participant. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, I mean, you were our first choice. We were sitting around the room. We said, who would be awesome on podcasting and to share their story about their creativity? And we said, Countess. It was unanimous. So we'll have you on there because, you know, I'm a fan. I'm fanboying out people.
Well, I too am a fan of your work.
So this is just a mutual admiration society, which is great.
Yes.
So we're going to start from the beginning. It's kind of a this is your life sort of scenario. But I know a little bit about you, but I want the world to know as much as possible about you in regards to how this creative journey started for you, being a dancer and a choreographer.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and I started dancing when I was 11 at just like a local studio. And I was like, oh, I enjoy this. And I went to National School of the Arts for high school. And I would say that's where I really started my training. I remember being in school and wondering like if professional dance was something that I would be able to do. But you know, there's only so much that you know about in your formative years. And so I only really knew about commercial dance and, you know, ballet type programs. And I only knew about a couple of modern programs. And so essentially I ended up going into college and pursuing physical therapy school because I had a really great ballet teacher that was like, well, you know, retired dancers, they go into physical therapy, so on and so forth. So I was like, okay, that's something I could look into. And then I went to college and, you know, I was taking every single dance class that I could, even though I was minoring in dance and had all these other classes I had to take for my actual major. But I just kept finding my way back to it. I think that there's just so much like beauty and magic that lives inside of dance. And actually DCDC, they came to my college and that was the first time that I saw, well, maybe not the first time, but the first time that I was really recognizing what I was seeing and that it was a Black dance company and they were, you know, telling these Black stories. And I really was just so enthralled by looking at them. They all looked different, but they all danced so beautifully together. And that was like a catalyst for me to say, okay, maybe I too can dance professionally. So I like got in all these ballet classes and again, still taking as many classes at the university as I could. And then, you know, and I had friends in college who loved to choreograph and I would be in their work sometimes. And I was like, oh, this is cool. But I just never really found myself in it. You know, I didn't really know that I had a place in choreography. So I just was like, well, I enjoy dancing. I'm just going to kind of stick with this. And then when I came to DCDC, you know, a lot of the process is, you know, we learn a lot. We also contribute to the creative process. And there was one show that we were working on for our arts and education outreach program. And Debbie had asked some of the company members to create, you know, a 3 to 4 minute piece that was, you know, adding to the story of the people who could fly. That was what the program was based around, the book called The People Who Could Fly. And so I was kind of nervous and I had done like, you know, recital things for the different studios that I worked at, but never anything like on a professional dance company. And so when I, you know, made this 3 to 4 minute piece, they looked at me and they were like, oh, and I mean, I didn't really know where it stood. You know, I thought it was just, you know, I found a song I liked and I had 6 dancers and I just made the piece they asked me to make essentially. And from there, it just kind of like catapulted. The next season, my coworker and I were commissioned to create a main stage piece for DCDC, and that was called Stepping in the Season. It was performed at the Victoria Theater, and we went on to, you know, be able to tour that piece a couple different places, which was really nice. And then it just, I don't know, all these other opportunities have just come up, and I think I don't say no. So then I'm like, you know, and it's interesting because choreography it doesn't really come, I don't think it comes easy to me. I think that teaching comes a little bit more naturally. I think that I really enjoy dancing, and there are aspects of dancing that come naturally, and there are other aspects I really have to work for, as we all know. And choreography is just one of those things that feels like such a big challenge because there's no direction. Like sometimes someone will say, I want you to make a piece to this music, or I want it to be the anchor of this show, or the piece has to be about this. But after that, it's all you. And so I think some of the challenge initially when I first started was like, does what I have to say matter, or are people going to be interested in it? And I have so many, I would say, stylistic influences that influence the way that I create phrase work, that like, does it all go together? And then can it all tell a story? Does it need to tell a story? And then so there's all these questions that come up when you start creating work. Whereas when you're learning someone else's work, then you try your best to be inside of their voice and to bring forth exactly what they have envisioned. And so, initially it was pretty scary. And I always went into it with all the prayers, like, oh, please, 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 let this be a good thing. And I think that, I still do. I think I still do. I definitely don't think it comes easier now that I've choreographed a lot more. I think that now that I've done it more and I've gotten to present my work on pretty big stages, which I'm so grateful for. And I'm, again, so grateful that Debbie believed in my work enough to allow me to have a lot of spaces to be able to present my work. And now I'm just trying to decide what I want to say and what I want to talk about right now, and how to make sure that that is in full alignment with who I am and my spirit, and is a most authentic, representation of who Countess is right now in her early 30s.
And that's what's amazing, Countess. And one of the things you touched upon, like you said, Debbie Blunden is the artistic director of Dayton Contemporary Dance Company, is the fact that there's always some person who sees it in you before you see it in yourself.
Absolutely.
And they give you that chance and an opportunity. And you said it's like a door open. You don't know how to say no because you just want to work in this process. What was really fascinating to me is the fact that you are so young in the process, but the work is so accomplished. I mean, that's why I fanboy out, because your work has so many multiple layers of interpretation and entry points. Are you consciously thinking about all of those elements? I mean, you bring in social causes, representation, video. I think you've done site specific, but we'll get into that later. But just what's going on in the creative process in your mind when you're presented with these challenges that people may not know that are going on in the head of a choreographer?
Yeah, I think that for me personally, when I create, I really try to start from a place that feels most honest and most true. And for me, that's my connection to spirit and my faith. And so I start there and start with a lot of praying about what direction to go in. And then I just think about the things that interest me. I would say right now I've been very interested in collaboration. The most recent work that I presented for the Dayton Contemporary Dance Company in February of this year, we had live music. My brother is a musician, so he composed all the music for this piece. I also had a spoken word / orator who created the dialogue that kind of tethered the whole piece together. I also got to work with my cousin, who is a brilliant visual artist, and she created a really beautiful painting of a tree, this huge tree that for me has a lot of symbolism, both personally and spiritually. But she created this rendering, and then we had that rendering essentially blown up on a huge translucent backdrop. So that's, 4 different people that I worked with on my most recent piece. And I really enjoy working with other artists who are really great at what they do. 1, because they're going to bring their best selves. And 2, it's really wonderful to have people who also believe in your work. And when we can all come together and create this really beautiful thing, I don't know. I am like truly an art lover. I grew up and I was a visual artist really before I was a dancer.
Oh, really?
And so
We
Yeah.
share so much. We share so much of the similar pathway. It's just canny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me and my brother and I, we were drawing on our long car trips to and from Nashville to Memphis. And anytime we were in the house and we had free time, we were drawing and painting and coloring. And that was something that was just of pure interest to us. And we've both shied away from it. I mean, clearly because now I'm heavily involved in dance and he's heavily involved in music. But that was like a very strong base for us. And I think that my desire and interest in visual art has never waned, which is why, like, whenever we go on tour, whenever I'm on vacation, one of my favorite things to do is to go to a local art museum and just see, I really just love art. I love even outdoor art. If there's like some cities will have like murals. And so I love to just kind of drive around the city or walk around the city and look at all the beautiful murals on the walls. Art is it's just always been like such a huge part of my life. And then obviously music is something that I would say most people can identify with, but music for me, is important to my creative process. If I don't like the music, it's very challenging for me to feel inspired to make a dance to music that I don't like. So in the times when I've had to do that, I've been like, okay, let me just try to like think of material and then I'll just put it to this music. So I don't like having to do that, but sometimes, we have to do that depending on the scenario. But I love being able to choose the music that I like. It has been really wonderful to work with my brother on my most recent projects and the music that he's created for me, because I've been able to kind of not dictate, but really say, I really want this to sound like this. I want the next song to sound like this. And then we toggle, we work back and forth, and then we reach a resting place that is a really great musical score. And then I get to create to it. And that feels like such a gift for me. So yeah, collaboration has really been something on my mind. I definitely think that as I continue to create more work, that if I can do collaboration in a way that's not going to hinder the work, then I would definitely like to continue to.
Oh, yeah. And I also, too, I love the fact that you can collaborate with your brother. You know that he's not going to try to let his sister down. So
yeah,
you have the familial connection on that one. And when the title of the work that you performed for DCDC in February, because I want people to kind of know so they can kind of dig into your history, because we'll be posting hopefully links and clips from your work and images so that people can kind of get a feel for it. And I was lucky to sit in the audience and see it, and I was just blown away by the complexity.
Thank you.
Going back to the whole, like, the name of the work that you presented for DCDC, I just remember one of the things that was really fascinating about it just felt like you were taking us on an ancestral journey, and it was very personal. And I really responded to that. And you had talked about earlier about representation. If you hadn't seen a dance company with Black and brown skinned people in it, do you think you would have currently had pursued the pathway of dance? Or was it just that the dance was just you were going to make it happen no matter what? Or was it the catalyst of seeing a modern company of pretty predominantly African Americans perform? Was that the spark?
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I think that I love dance, and I'm not really a person who is like, I only do this kind of dance. I really am a person who I love all the genres. Now, I will say, I tell people I am a modern girl at heart. Give me a roll on the floor and a hair flip and a partnering section. I love it all. So I would say I am definitely more attracted to, and I feel most comfortable in my body doing, movement that is of the modern aesthetic, but I love and appreciate all styles of dance. I will say that, prior to seeing DCDC, I had seen Alvin Ailey. So that was one Black dance company that I had seen. I'd also seen, Dallas Black, I didn't see them perform, but they came to my school and they did like a residency day. And that was really cool to see them, in our space, and to know that they were professional dancers and to learn from them. And I did enjoy that class, but it was such a short experience, I would say. If we would have had them for a week, that would have been really cool, but it was just one day. So those are the couple of bites of Black dance, I would say, that I got to see. I didn't know about the International Association of Blacks in Dance, which is a Black dance conference that was started over 30 years ago, which is a compilation of all the Black dance companies in the nation that are a part of this conference, and one of the founding companies. So I had never heard about IABD, whereas I have a lot of friends who in middle school, they were going to the conferences, and in high school, they were going to the conferences, and in college, they went to the conferences, and which is fine. I think I got a lot of exposure, in certain lanes, which I think, my teachers in high school did the best they could with what they knew, which was wonderful. We did a lot of really wonderful things. But, I think that, I am a person who, I look the way I look. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a Southern girl. And so not often do you see Southern looking women on stage. And so, when I saw DC for the first time and I saw the variety of the bodies and I saw the interesting work that they did, and they did some pretty, they did some big work when they came to my school. They did Vespers, which is a very well-known piece. It's a world-renowned piece that actually was first performed here at the Dayton Contemporary Dance Company, and now it's performed anywhere and all over the world by multiple companies and conservatories, so on and so forth. But it's a pretty major piece to be able to say started here in Dayton, and they did that piece at my school. So when I first saw Vespers in person, I was like, what? I had never seen anything like that. Or at least it didn't hit. If I had, it didn't hit me the same way.
And Vespers is built to hit you a certain way. For our audience, Vespers as a work it's propulsive. It's got this incredible sound score, and it's all women on stage with chairs, and they are moving with a fervor and intensity that it's all consuming. And we're going to hopefully, cross my fingers, will include some photographs of Vespers on the Instagram and Facebook pages for the art show, so you can kind of get a taste and feel, but you got to see it live. If you see it on a bill, go see Vespers.
Yes. So, I was just in awe when I first saw that. And so long story short, I would say that, to your point, Rodney, that seeing DC perform live and also getting to spend a week with them, because they were with us for a week, that was really the catalyst to allow me to believe that there was a space for me in the dance world. And, I came to DC because I wanted to train more. I knew I needed more training if I were going to pursue a professional career. I didn't come thinking that I was going to dance specifically for DC, but I knew I wanted to come here to train, and I wanted to soak up and learn all that I could from this space, because they just left such a big impression on me. And so, I did the thing that you do for dancers who are in a pre-professional program or that are in training, or even once they get ready to graduate from college and they're starting to look for jobs, you go to auditions, and some of those auditions are cattle call auditions where it's hundreds of people trying to get 2 spots in the company. And some of those auditions were a little bit smaller. But ultimately, what I learned was that what we do here at DC is what I was most interested in. DC is a repertory company, which is a company that does choreography by multiple choreographers, not just one single choreographer. And there's just so much challenge in that, because you don't spend all your time in one style. You're really we're doing African and contemporary dance and hip hop dance and a contemporary ballet dance, sometimes all in the same program. And that can be very, very challenging as the dancer, but it presents such a wonderful challenge that I think is the driving force for why I'm still here and I still want to dance with DC, and I still love dancing for DC. So I would say that was the catalyst. And then I didn't want to miss your question about the title of the piece. So the piece that I created for DC was entitled Human Nature. And in the program, it's written human/nature. And the reason for that is because with that piece in particular, I was interested in exploring the human experience and then juxtaposing the human experience to the ways in which nature goes through its own life cycle. So finding the common spaces between humans and nature, but also kind of just putting it out there that there are things that are a part of the human condition that are just natural to our human nature. So I used a lot of personal influences for different sections of the piece. My mom is a woman who loves photographs. And I guess it could be a baby boomer thing because my dad is the same way and they love photographs. And I love photographs too.
Like tangible, real, touching photographs, not the digital kind on your phone.
Digital,
Yeah.
right. They love them. And I mean, and I get it because, they've been on the earth for a long time and a lot of people that have been in their lives maybe have transitioned. And so pictures are a really lovely way of keeping people alive and keeping, stories alive. And so what I did for this piece was I collected a myriad of pictures that were at my mom's house of people that were a part of my life and my lineage and my journey and my upbringing and my root system. And, I looked at those pictures and I wanted to bring those pictures to life in a way that would also kind of talk about like why my great grandfather was a preacher in the South and the significance of that in the Black community, but also in a Southern Black community. I wanted to recreate my imagination of what it was like when my grandparents first met. I never got to know my grandmother, but I did know my grandfather. And I did a little research to try to learn more about them. And that was a little challenging to learn about. But I got to just imagine what their love was like. That then led to them having 10 children, which then led to me essentially. So there are a lot of aspects. Actually, the whole piece, I would say, is built based off of these photographs, based off of my connection to my faith and spirituality, based off of my connection to jazz music, based off of my connection to nature and my exploration of how we as people connect to nature. And it's heavily embedded in our history, connection to the earth, connection to spirit. And I wanted this piece to kind of show all these tethers of connection that we have amongst us. And so, the piece, first of all, took a long time to really put into motion and to conceptualize. And it started to become more and more rich the more time I spent with it. And I think that we're going to perform it again next spring in Cincinnati. And I'm looking forward.
Fantastic. So people, like, you listen to this podcast, you need to go see the piece. It is so worth it. One of the things that is so funny was I talked about the piece being about very ancestral. You nailed it. I mean, in essence, as an audience member, everything that you're describing is exactly what you put on the stage. And it came together in a way. I remember I wrote an article in the Dayton Daily News and they were talking about amplifying new Black voices. And I wrote a piece about you.
Yes.
So there's a connection. And I said, she choreographs in a way that is beyond her years. And in that sense, and there's no diss on those who've been at the craft of choreography their entire lives for decades and decades and decades, you've tapped the work in a way that I expect somebody who's 3 times your age. And so I'm just like, so where do you go from that kind of process? I mean, that's my personal opinion of your work, is that it's that mature and it's that nuanced and it's that thought through. And you talked about you had ruminated on this process. How long did it take you? Like, was this an idea that you already had in, say, your book of ideas?
That's a great question. And I just want to shout out you, Rodney Veal, because I saw that article the morning of the premiere. You go through all the things as artists and you're like, oh my gosh, is it going to be good? Are people going to like it? Is this worth it? Like, is it going to be good?
We are creatures riddled with doubt about our abilities.
Oh my gosh. So riddled with doubt. And seeing that article, it was like, oh my gosh, I really needed to see this morning just to keep me in, I don't know, just to like reignite me and reinvigorate me. So thank you so much for writing such a beautiful article. I really appreciate it. It's funny because Debbie and I were sitting around, we were about to do a performance and we were sitting in the green room and I was talking to her about what I was going to do. This is in 2018. And I was telling her what I was going to do for the holiday break. And I was like, oh, my mom and I are going to go to see Wesley perform on Holland Cruise Lines. He's a saxophone player. And she was like, really? I did not know that. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I guess I thought I had told her, but maybe it didn't happen. So anyway, she was like, oh, I'm so interested in this. And so then maybe like a month later, so early 2019, she was like, I've been thinking, I wonder if we could do a show with you and your brother, like you guys collaborating on a new work. And I was like, oh, I'm open to that. And she's like, does he write music? I was like, I think he does. I'm not sure. Long story short, 2-3 years later, here we are.
I mean, that's a long period of gestation for a piece.
It is. And what's interesting is the piece was supposed to premiere in 2021, but then we had 2020 and we did not expect 2020.
No one did.
So, Debbie was like, well, we could do the piece, but I really don't want you to feel like you have to nickel and dime to do the piece. I really want to be able to do the piece in its fullest form, however you imagine it being. So she said that she was going to postpone it to 2022. And I'm so thankful that she did, because, when we did finally get to perform the work, it was just such a wonderful, the whole show I think was really wonderful, but it was a really nice homecoming in a way as well. And so, as far as the actual piece, I would say Wesley and I didn't really get into what the meat of the piece was about those 6 or 7 months prior to the show. And the reason is because, we had an idea of what we were going to do, and then we kind of tabled it because we had more time. But in that time, I think it was really a great experience because Wesley came to Dayton during 2020 summer, and we worked together on just creating some ideal music scores that I think we only used one of those music scores once we got to the actual show. But, we started this working process together, and then he made music for me for a virtual lecture demonstration that I created and choreographed for. And then he also created a piece of music for me for a work that I did at the Ohio State University when I was a visiting artist for the spring 2021 semester. So we had easily 2 pretty big projects that we got to work on before really diving back into this work. And I think that those processes allowed us to create a really great working relationship. But in addition, we got to grow even more as artists before we got to the big one. I think if we had done it, 2-3 years prior to 2022, we might not have been artistically ready or as close to where we were when we made this piece. And so in a lot of ways, I'm really grateful for the additional time. I think the additional time also allowed us to be able to dive more into what we were trying to say, what he wanted to say with the music, what I wanted to say with the choreography. And, we already have a good bond. We're less than a year apart. So we've always been pretty close, not like talk on the phone every day close, but like we think very similarly. We have very similar demeanor. And so working together was just like a piece of cake. I know that's not always the scenario, but I'm so grateful.
That's not always a sibling sort of connective threads. And my brother's 5 years older than me and had no interest in anything that I was doing as an artist. But he does now. I mean, it was just really, brother love, shout out to that. And so one of the things that was really interesting to me about this is this process of time. I don't think people really understand that the creative process doesn't just happen with a snap of the fingers. Mm-hmm. It is a very arduous, time-consuming process. Yes. Can you kind of elaborate on that first so that for the people in the back row who are listening understand how much time you need to do these things?
Yes. Well, so we started in July of 2021. And, we started with ideas for what we would want the music to sound like and how the music would progress over the course of the piece. Additionally, I don't know if I said this, but the piece is about 30 minutes long and there are 6 different sections of music. And we wanted each section to be able to have a life of its own. So like it doesn't have to be performed with the full conglomerate of the piece, but we also wanted each section to connect. So we started with talking about, what we want the different sections to look like and sound like and feel like. And that was the kind of initiating point. And then, I was pretty much the one that wanted to have these different stories that we told in each section. And then Wesley kind of took those ideas and feelings and wrapped them up into his musical brain. And I would say we didn't finish the music with all the tweaks until late December. And then, so that was about 6-ish months. And then he was actually in Dayton for the whole month of February so that he could work with the University of Dayton Jazz Ensemble, who was going to be performing the music live. And even while he was here, we were finalizing the spoken word artist's sound score. So we had her record what she wrote for the piece. And then we, added little technical things to her audio recording that helped to give it a little bit more production value or a little bit more metrics in a way. And so we were working on some of those things up until the middle of February, and the piece was performed on February 25th and 26th. And so the other part that comes into play is costumes and lighting. So I would say we have a really wonderful lighting designer at DCDC, and he was the one that really helped me decide what direction to go in with the artwork. And with what he suggested and what we worked on with the visual artist, plus the amazing light designer that he is and the lights that he created, it was pretty magical to see it all come together.
Matt Evans.
Matt Evans.
He's the man. He's so super cool. Pretty amazing lighting designer. And that's the other thing I think a lot of people don't understand about dance, because it is such a collaborative thing. Lighting can make or break a piece.
Yeah.
So somebody has to understand how to light bodies as they move through space versus being static or standing still. It's a very different, it's a unique perspective as a profession. So I just want people to know that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And in addition to that, the next person I was going to talk about is Lamore Amir, who is our costume designer extraordinaire. And those costumes have to be tailor-made to each dancer, and, material has to be ordered. And it was a lot of moving parts. But I was up for it. I felt like there were moments where I wondered if I was going to become overwhelmed by the number of things on the to-do list to tend to for this piece alone, because I was also dancing in the other works on the program as well, which I was grateful for. Because the thing that can happen is sometimes when you become a creator, then there can sometimes be more emphasis on you doing that than you still being the artist. And I have been pretty vocal with my directors about that. And I'm also just vocal to myself about it. Like, I want to create, and I'm so grateful to be able to create, and I want to continue expanding my creativity and making new work, but not at the expense of me being a dancer artist first. And I'm sure that as I continue to age, then, I'll want to maybe be on the stage less and less. But at the moment, I still have the same vigor and excitement about performing as I did when I first arrived. So that passion hasn't gone away for me. So I'm really grateful to be able to do both simultaneously and be in a place that supports me artistically and creatively.
That's so awesome. And okay, so you're very humble, but the reality of the situation, folks, for those listening, she was dancing in two works. She's creating this piece for DCDC, but she also applied for a site-specific work that was at the Cincinnati Art Museum that she received. So at the same time, she was working, dancing, then she was looking for the next opportunity, and it was happening at the same time. The only reason why I know about Cincinnati Art Museum is that Ohio Dance, I'm the president of the board, and we entered into a partnership with Cincinnati Art Museum to create a site-specific work based upon two exhibits that were coming to the museum. The David Driscoll exhibit of paintings, and the Kamanje Group workshop of photography. Now, you got the commission to create the work at the same time. So this is a workaholic, people. Such a workaholic. Oh my God. So talk about the Cincinnati resident, because that was site-specific. We'll talk about that a little more in detail, but talk about it.
Yeah, well, so I actually saw this call for artists, I don't know, it might have been late December. And a couple of people had sent it to me, and I was like, oh, this is right up my alley. First of all, I love museums, as I've already talked about. I love art museums. And I also love site-specific dancing. And it's not something that we get to do too often. We're mostly dancing on stages, I would say, 90% of the time. But I love dancing outside. I love dancing in strange places. There's just so much magic that comes into like bringing movement into spaces where you don't normally see movement. So I remember saying to myself in September of last year, I don't know why I was thinking about site-specific work, but I was like, I want to make a site-specific work. I want to do that. And then 3-4 months later, I saw this call and I was like, oh, I am definitely applying for this. I'm already excited. I was so excited about it. And I read the proposal and I was like, or the call and what they were asking us to do as far as creating proposals. And it was a pretty lengthy process. And at first I was like, wow, am I going to be able to like dive into this work while also making this other work?
We did ask for a lot. I'm not going to lie. We did ask for a lot.
Yeah, sense, and so I was like, okay, well, in between the time of working on the other work, when I had some free time, I was like, okay, well, I researched these artists and I want to look into their work, because that was part of the proposal as well. You had to talk about how your work would connect to the main artist's work that were being showcased. But for me, I was like, well, I feel like I need to look at their work. If I'm going to make this work that is really supposed to support their work, then I need to look at what they do. And looking at the work of David Driscoll in the Kamoinge workshop, I was just floored. And I had never heard of either artist, or either the group of artists and the individual artists. I had never heard of them. So once I started listening to some of their interviews and started looking at their work online, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I mean, there was just so much richness, and from two different perspectives. They were capturing life from different perspectives.
And no, David Driscoll was an abstract expressionist painter in many ways, but he was so much more. An African-American who was pretty much the godfather of all the artists who have like come through the visual art world from the African-American diaspora. He's the godfather, basically, in essence, of all of us who make visual art. And the Kamoinge group was photography. It was a group of photographers who made their own way in Harlem. And so they're documenting life as they saw it through the lens of a camera. So yeah, these are big, heavy duty exhibits happening simultaneously.
Yeah. It seemed like a really big deal. And so I was like, well, I'm going to just apply for it and I'm going to just see how it goes. So, I took the time and really just dived into working on this proposal. And I'm pretty sure I turned it in, minutes before the deadline, as I do. And
that's okay. It's okay. We all do that. We all do that.
And then I just let it go. I said, well, I don't know if it's going to happen, but I knew that even as I sent it off, that I was excited about what I had proposed. And I thought that even if I wasn't chosen, that I would still keep the proposal and do it somewhere else whenever the opportunity came around. And so I remember I was in rehearsal. We were in our first week of rehearsals back at DCDC, and I was working on the men's section of my piece. And we were taking a very quick break, and I checked my email and I saw that I was chosen, and I was like, oh, what? Just like so surprised. And I'm not really one who's gonna like shout from the rooftops, this is what I do. I'm very, I don't know, I just do what I do and then I kind of go about my way. But the reason I applied is because I wanted to be more proactive about getting my work out there and be more confident about my work that I've done. And that can be a hard journey in itself, to feel like the work that you do is worthy of applying for other opportunities to create things. But part of my personal mission in getting to work on this piece for DCDC was like, Countess, you got to work on being more confident about your own work. It can't be that everybody else believes in you, but you need to work on your belief in yourself. So I've been trying to exercise applying for more things, even if I don't know that it's going to happen for me. Part of my personal confidence practice was applying for things and just seeing if there is space for me to continue creating in the world. And so it was really a humbling experience to be able to work on this particular project with the Cincinnati Art Museum.
Oh, that's so awesome. And, so that people understand, it's like, and I'm going to throw this title out to folks and we'll post it on the art show, Facebook and Instagram. Black Futures by Kimberly Drew was sort of an inspiration. And so to let you know the process of how we set it up, Countess, they approached us, and I remember the head curator of photography, Emily, is just phenomenal. And we had lunch and we discussed it. And I said, this is a book you should use as the kind of guide map for bringing voices from the Black community into the museum space. And one of the things was they recognized that they needed to do a better job with that. And so they wanted to do it the right way. And so we were just kind of there to help guide it. And so if you get a chance, folks, this book is absolutely a primer on Black creativity and that process. So that's the foundation of that. But I want you to talk about, because I got to see the performance, because Folks, I go see all dance. When I see dance, of course it's Countess, so I have to be there because I know it's always going to be exciting. Describe this work, because I don't think I could do it justice the way you could, and how you use the space.
Yeah. So I actually, going back to that book, Black Futures, I purchased that book and I didn't even realize at first that that was the catalyst for the creation of the title of the series. But when I read the book, and it's a big anthology, so it's hard to read it in one setting, but it has so much beauty inside of it. So that was a really heavy source of research for my work. But the work that I created for the Cincinnati Art Museum was entitled Homage, What Was, Is, comma, to come. And you could read it as homage, what was, is to come, or you could read it as what was, is to come. And I felt like we couldn't talk about Black futures and the idea of Black people in the future and what that looks like and what it sounds like and what it is if we did not acknowledge the past. And so my proposal for this particular project was to create a moving museum experience where you experience the African American experience in the past, the African American experience today as it is, and my imagination of what the African American experience can be, which represented the future section. So we had a past section entitled What Was, we had a present section entitled Is, and we had a future section entitled To Come. So the title was almost like a precursor as to what each section was about. Very rarely do I go to museums and actually do the tours, but sometimes it's nice to walk through museums and have a tour guide that tells you what a particular exhibit is about and what you're going to be experiencing and how all of the artwork in this particular experience, in this particular exhibit, contributes to the overall theme of the exhibit. So the first part of the show started on the outside of the museum, and that was purposeful. When I saw in the proposal the pictures of the areas you could use, I already knew. I was like, oh yes, these columns outside of the Cincinnati Art Museum, which I learned in process is one of the oldest museums in the country. I didn't even realize that.
Right, exactly. It is truly, I was like, it's truly a gym within a gym.
It is. It is. There are these, large concrete columns in the front of the museum. And, one could say that there's a lot of architectural references that you could look into to establish why. But my first thought when I saw those columns was plantation homes. And so the reason I wanted to have the first section, which was the past, presented outside of the museum was to represent the idea of what the African American past looked like and how we got to that point. So we started with talking about the transatlantic slave trade and how that really started, where that began. And then once we finished in that section, we moved through the museum into this outer courtyard, or actually it's an inner courtyard, but it's outside, but it's in the center of the actual museum.
For people to give them a reference point about the Cincinnati Art Museum, it kind of has like a layout like a Roman villa in the sense that there's an inner courtyard and kind of surrounds this courtyard. So there's this activity and the audience moves with the artist and the performers. So we moved with the performance into the spaces with them. So we became a part of the journey. So
exactly. And, I'm sorry, I didn't say this part. I had a spoken word artist as well for this show. And the spoken word artist was like our griot through time. So she starts the program and she is the one that kind of talks us through what we're watching, what we're experiencing. And the dancing is happening intermixed with her talking. And I think that she and her role was, for me, integral to the experience because I wanted it to feel like people were on the journey with us. I didn't want it to feel like it was you had to try to figure it out on your own. I really wanted it to feel like she was just really guiding us like a tour guide. So she is the person who guided the audience from one section to the next and to the next. And by all the dancing magic, the dancers would appear in these different areas as theatrically sound as possible. So we had the first section, and she walks the audience from the first section, which is on the outside of the museum, into the courtyard, which is where the present section happens. And in the present section, I really wanted to highlight the Black Lives Matter movement and what that means to the Black community today and why. I really wanted to talk about the why, because there are sometimes things happen and they can become these movements, and we don't always, if you're not careful, you can just kind of jump on board with the thing and not always know what the root of it is. And so I wanted this section to really talk about the root of the Black Lives Matter movement and why it's important to keep talking about it. So we had that in the courtyard. And I also thought it was appropriate to have it in the courtyard because the courtyard has this beautiful, just lush landscaping and fountains, and just has it had a more present and alive feel than what the first section had. The first section, is those concrete columns, and it's very drab. It feels like the past. And the courtyard felt very present to me because of the beauty that existed inside of it. But even in that, even with all the beauty, we need to be able to talk about the other things that aren't so beautiful too. And then we moved into the future section, which was in this beautiful great hall area of the museum. And as soon as I saw the picture of the Great Hall, there was this regalness about it that just felt like a space of ascension and royalty and just beauty. And so I was like, this definitely has to be the future section. So what happens is Vinay leads the audience from the courtyard, which is the present, into the Great Hall, which is the future. And when you walk into the future section, you're greeted with a video of Black people just dancing and being free and not bogged down, not chained by all of the things that exist inside of the psychology of what African American history has been, but an imagination of just peace and tranquility and joy and love, and that being the surrounding feeling, and the hope that in our Black future, that is the resounding experience, not the things that we have experienced, but acknowledging the triumph and then forging ahead with joy and peace as the catalyst. And so the piece culminates in this great hall area, and the dancers walk up the stairs, and the spoken word artist, she completes our journey. And, as we were creating this, as I was working with the spoken word artist, we didn't really know who she is. Like, she is this person that that you've met in your lifetime, but also that you don't know or that you haven't met yet. She was almost like a Glinda from The Wiz, if you've ever seen The Wiz, like the fairy.
Yes. So it's almost like, I love how you described that. Like Glinda, like she was all knowing, but she wasn't going to tell you everything.
Exactly. But she knew everything. And she was from the future and the past at the same time. And there was this, and she just kind of floated through. She disappeared when it was time for her to disappear. She appeared when it was time. And I think that I think that she really, who she is, who the artist is as an individual, I think really also contributed to the kind of mystery of who this woman was. And I was really grateful to have gotten to work with some great artists on this. So anyway, long story short.
These stories are great. These are good stories. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And, I wanted it to feel like you were going on a journey. So the piece ended up being about 35 to 40 minutes long. And that was completely my desire. And I wanted it to be something that felt a little bit more evening length, not just for the sake of making a long show, but so that we had time to really be inside of the experience for the fullness of the experience. So it was really wonderful. And going back to what Rodney said, I got to work with Emily, who was just, she was the best person. And everybody at the museum was so kind, and they really did all they could to make all my dreams come true for this show. And Emily, she was on the front lines with me. It's almost like we were like forging at this thing from both sides, on the museum side for her and the choreographic side for me. And she really tried to and did make everything happen that I wanted to make happen. And it was really a great working experience. And aside from it, the show turning out to be really wonderful, it was a great working and building experience, which I think was a gift for sure.
Oh, that's so awesome. And you're echoing exactly how I felt in working with Emily through Ohio Dance and this journey and this process. And for those who are listening, we covered Countess's journey with the Cincinnati Art Museum for the art show. So if you get a chance and an opportunity, that clip is available right now on our YouTube channel. And you can kind of check out, you can see images and video from the work. It's stunning. I know we have a lot of video footage of the entire performance itself that I'm hoping has been compiled because it's phenomenal and needs to be seen. And I know it's not the same as experiencing it live, but it needed to be captured. Like after you were finished with it, because what I love about you is the fact that you state a goal, you hit the goal, and you hit it so masterfully. What does it feel like after you've done it? Like you've done this work for the Cincinnati Museum, which was beautiful and incredible and impactful. What's going on? What's your process after you do something like this? How do you comprehend what just happened? As an art maker?
Well, it's interesting. I think sometimes you don't always know what it's going to look like or be like or sound like or feel like until it's done. And I had a very similar feeling when I did the piece for DCDC. I was like, I think this is going to be bigger than what I imagined, like I think that's usually how I feel on the other side of it, which I think is the better way to feel. I think I'm so grateful that I feel that, something that I have birthed has a larger range than what I anticipated, which is really, I think, part of my goal. I think that art can be so impactful. And I think if you only try to make it impactful for you as the artist, then it hasn't really fully done the thing. It hasn't really fully reached its potential. But I really want the work that I do to be beyond me, to have a life, without me, essentially, this is a great piece, but not just because I made it, but because the work is really great work that can live on and be appreciated or even just remembered from the people who got to experience it. And I think if it can make a lasting impact in that way, that is the most satisfying thing. So, once the show was over, I just enjoyed spending time with my mom because she came up for the show, which was really great. And then I just was like, well, that was great. I'm also grateful I get to experience it too. I don't want to miss the moment. And it's easy to, when you are doing a lot of things with, because I'm dancing and I'm teaching and I'm doing things, and it's easy to start to kind of miss the moment because you're trying to accomplish a goal. But I really work to be as present as possible. And then when it's time to give it over, to do all the magical things that art can do, I feel very ready to just give it over and let it be as much as it is. I think also as artists, there's always things. You're always like, okay, next time I do this, I want to change this. I want to etch this. I want to do this. There's all these things that come. But I think that it definitely allows me to feel free in a different way. Creating and being a choreographer, it can be, again, very challenging, but it can be very freeing. And I feel like sometimes I leave those scenarios where a piece has just been finished performing and it went well. And I have this feeling of elation and limitlessness. And I think it's good to feel like we're not limited because there's so many things in life that can make us feel limited and small. And I really appreciate and try to take in the moments where I can feel like I'm flying, because there's always going to be things in life, part of the human condition. There's always going to be ups and downs. And I really, really work to just relish in the beautiful moments while they're happening. And then when it's time to move on to something different, I feel ready to move to the next thing. And not that I'm just constantly trying to find the next thing, but I do like to relish in the moment, but then move to wherever is next, whatever is next on my list. And sometimes it's not anything. Sometimes it's just taking a break. I took a good 4 weeks off this summer and it was really lovely to not have to think about anything creatively, just travel and enjoy my time with friends and family. And so I think that it's nice to be able to kind of relish in those moments and then leave them and then revisit them on video or in articles, so.
That's so great. That's so awesome. So one of the things that, I love, and this is our parting statement from you. This is for those who maybe are seeking inspiration. I think you definitely touched base on it. For those folks out there who are thinking about creating or thinking about changes in their lives and things like that, what would be your number one piece of advice for getting that creative spark?
I think that my number one piece of advice would be to be open to continuing to learn about yourself. I think the more, and it can take a while. One thing I've learned is that it can take a while to get to know who you are, because then also your desires change and you evolve and you have different experiences. And so, I think I take a staple thing for me is I take time, with myself every morning just to check in, see where I'm at, see what is inspiring to me, see what I'm interested in. And then I just allow those things to infiltrate my creativity and the way that I approach creating. And so the artists that I look up to, the choreographers that I just love their work and I love what they have to say, they feel like they are on their own personal journeys, and their work is a reflection of, even if it's not all of their life, maybe it's a part of their life. It might not even be their story. It might be like their mother's story, or it might be their best friend's story. But if they've identified that this person or that story is important to them and the reasons why, then they can make this work, or they can make that work, and it can be impactful. So I would say that's the biggest piece of advice. I mean, I think that the more we know about ourselves, the more at peace we can be with who we are and where we are in life, and the more at peace that we can be inside of ourselves, and the more healed that we can be walking through the world, then I really think that's what allows us to have an authentic experience. And I think it's what allows other people to have authentic experiences with us. If we can be true to who we are and true to who we are in the world, then it leaves a portal for people to be true to themselves, and then for people to take you as you are, So that would be my biggest piece of advice for any creator, is just make things that make sense to you, that feel authentic to you. And if you make it authentically, then there are no wrong answers. That's the thing about creativity. There are no wrong answers. If it's right to you, then it's right. And there's always going to be someone who loves your work. There's always going to be someone who doesn't love it. And that's just the reality. But also those things matter and don't matter, because if it's honest to you, then that's what people will receive.
I love it. That's the best way to end this conversation. Countess, thank you for giving us the inspiration. And for everybody out there, please, by all means, continue to check out this podcast, but also to check out our Facebook page, our website, our Instagram. We'll be having clips and images from all the things we talked about in this podcast. So thank you.
Rodney Veal's Inspired By is a production of Public Media Connect, the regional partnership of CET in Cincinnati and Think TV in Dayton. There's a lot of great art happening around Southwest Ohio, and we're excited to be part of it. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can learn more and find the show notes at thinktv.org/inspiredby or cetconnect.org/inspiredby. Thank you.